Good morning, folks. I want to welcome everyone to the PFAS and potential effects on rural wastewater treatment webinar. This webinar is brought to you by the Western States Alliance, which is a project of PPRC. And this webinar has been made possible through a grant from the USDA's Rural Utilities Service. Well, like the rest of the country, and basically for the world for that matter, PFAS is a growing concern, and it might very well be more acute in rural areas. And this may be the case for several reasons, such as one, rural water utilities have fewer resources, generally speaking, and less advanced technologies compared to larger systems. Two, regulatory pressure. As federal and state regulations on PFAS tighten, rural wastewater utilities often have fewer resources to comply with the upcoming new testing, reporting, and treatment requirements. Third, source control issues. PFAS can basically enter wastewater systems from a wide range of sources, and in rural areas, identifying and controlling these sources can be very challenging. And finally, but certainly not least, PFAS contamination can have adverse effects, impacts to surface water, groundwater, and soil, which can pose risks to local drinking water sources, ecosystems, and agriculture. So basically, this webinar will attempt to answer some of these questions, or at least give you some additional insight on the issues that involve PFAS. But before we begin the presentation, perhaps it's a good idea that I introduce myself. My name is Ed Gonzalez. I'm the director of the Pollution Prevention Resource Center. Some of you know us as PPRC. We are a nonprofit organization. We're located in Seattle, Washington, and we were founded in 1991 to provide and develop pollution prevention information, technical training, and technical assistance to small businesses, small rural communities, and industrial facilities. We've done so in well over 40 sectors. So PPR services come in the form of research, site assessments, face-to-face and virtual technical trainings, and general information dissemination. PPRC proudly sponsors the Western States Alliance, which through this project, we received the grant from the USDA. It's important to note that in accordance with federal law and U.S. Department of Agriculture's civil rights regulations and policies, PPRC does not discriminate on basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, and reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activity. PPRC is an equal opportunity provider. And this is a statement that is required by the USDA for us to announce. Slide 3, okay. The Western States Alliance has developed a website, folks, that's chock full of fog-related information, as you see on your screen. We have a calendar of all of our training events. We have technical resources, including a fog outreach toolkit, a resource library, national resource reference guide with fact sheets, worksheets, videos, and much, much more. The website also contains a rapid response service where you can submit a technical question, and our team will conduct in-depth research in an attempt to give you a thorough answer. You just type westernstatesalliance.org, one word, you'll be taken to the website. And if you go to the page, for more information about the content we'll be covering today, will be made available sometime in the next week or so. Slide 4. So this slide gives you a snapshot of the content that we're going to be covering today. We're going to have some background on PFAS and its sources, the results of a small POTW survey that we conducted this fiscal year, current restrictions on biosolids applications, testing and monitoring for PFAS, preventing PFAS from entering the wastewater treatment plant, and identifying sources of PFAS, best management practices and education, and how to work with drinking water authorities, public notification, and regulatory authorities. And now we should begin the presentation. So next up is Ms. Jean Waters, who's PPRC's Senior Technical Program Manager. Jean, take it away.
Thanks, Ed. Folks, we're going to start with a poll question here. Since this is a national webinar, we didn't apply for CEUs. Let's see, Ken, would you launch this question for us, please? The question is, if you would like to have a certificate of completion, if you want to have a certificate of completion after the webinar, if you would say yes to this poll question, then we will have that in the GoToWebinar statistics, and then we can send you, email you a certificate of completion after the webinar. So please answer yes if you would like to have a certificate of completion. And then you can use that to apply to your own CEUs in your own state. The other thing I wanted to mention is in the panel, the GoToWebinar panel, there's a place to ask questions. So as you come up, as we are talking and you're thinking of questions, please put those in the question box in the GoToWebinar panel, and then we've got time at the end of this presentation to provide questions and answers. Ken, are we back live now? Can I go on to the next slide?
Indeed, yes.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So everyone probably knows the PFAS or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And there's different, there's polytetrafluoroethylene, which is PTFE. There's PFOA. Teflon is one of the original polyfluoroalkyl substances. We kind of use PFAS as a generic term, but there are many different kinds of chain lengths and then chemicals that are added on the back end of these different fluorine compounds. They all have the thing in common as saturated with fluorine. So it's a carbon chain, a linear carbon chain with fluorine instead of hydrogen on the carbons. So then whatever's on the other end, in this case we're showing oxygen and hydrogen, that can vary. So this is a diagram that I took from a C.D.M. Smith presentation. Ian Ross was the presenter here. And it shows the different chain lengths, different carbon chain lengths that are saturated with fluorine. And the thing that you need to know about all of this is that some of these smaller chains, these sources of perfluorocarboxylates are found in many different kinds of chemicals. For example, in refrigerants, these refrigerants that we used, hydrofluorocarbons, not speaking well, replaced some of the ozone depleting refrigerants years ago, and now some of these refrigerants are being replaced again, but some of these refrigerants contain these fluorinated carbons as part of those, and they are forming these shorter chain perfluorocarbonates, and then these are literally raining down from the sky into our atmosphere. And the shorter chains are bioaccumulative in plants. The longer chains are bioaccumulative in humans, meaning that they get into the plant or they get into the human, the animal, and they don't metabolize, they don't get excreted. So there is some bioaccumulation of some of these different these different PFAS. Another thing that I'll show you another picture here in just a minute, but I like the image that Ian Ross shared with the short, well, with all of these PFAS, the piece that is saturated with fluorine is like an arrowhead. And so over on the right-hand side of this slide, he broke them down into ultra short, short, and long pieces of fluorinated carbon. So think about that. These are the forever chemicals. These are the parts of the chain that don't go away, these fluorinated carbons. There can be a non-fluorinated part to these PFAS, and those can be broken down through the degradation in the environment. But the persistent part is the perfluorinated carbon part. So think of it like an arrow. We could go out and find arrow heads from thousands of years ago. The arrow part would be gone. It would rot away and be degraded. But the arrowhead part stays. It's the stone arrowhead. So the perfluoroalkyl acids formed here persist like chemical rocks. So that's one way to think about this. There's a lot of different compounds that are being produced these days, but this perfluoroalkyl part is the part that's going to stay. That's the forever chemical, and that's the part that we're worried about. So we know that high levels of some PFAS can impact health. The CDC has quite a bit of information on that. We still don't know everything, but this slide right here shows some of the effects that we have found and we have been able to show in humans. These particular ones were caused by the PFAS in the drinking water downstream of the DuPont plant where Teflon was being produced in West Virginia. So increases in cholesterol levels, lower antibody responses for some vaccines, changes in liver enzymes, pregnancy-induced hypertension and preeclampsia, small decreases in birth weight, and kidney and testicular cancer were all linked to these higher levels of PFAS in drinking water. And of course, you can tell by looking at these, and you know this, I'm sure anyway, that different people are more susceptible to these enzymes, to these PFAS based on who those people are. So, you know, pregnant women are more susceptible. People who have high cholesterol might be more susceptible. People with low immune response systems already because they have cancer or some other chronic illness might be more susceptible. So all of these things are things to think about. These are risks, and it depends on the level of PFAS and on the person who's ingesting that PFAS. So where are these compounds commonly found? They are in a variety of consumer products. PFAS are effective at preventing water or grease absorption, also to provide stain resistance in carpets, waterproof clothing. Ari's going to talk later about some of the personal care products that some PFAS are in cosmetics or sunscreens, food wrappers, lots of herbicides and pesticides, nonstick cookware, paints, varnishes, inks, and dyes. All of these different kinds of products may contain PFAS. One of the things on this list is firefighting foams, aqueous film forming foam, AFFF, is an effective fire suppressant, and it's been in use since the 1960s to extinguish flammable liquid fires such as fuel fires. But it contains PFAS, perfluorooctane sulfonate. There are many contaminated sites that with this AFFF foam, military and civilian airports throughout the country. And then also there are stockpiles of this foam still connected to different fire suppression systems. So some people have stopped using these foams that contain PFAS, but these foams may contain short chain PFAS, and the Navy has recently qualified some new fluorine-free foams, F3 foams, that are effective at fighting fuel fires. So as people are switching from the AFFF, hopefully they'll be going to the F3, the fluorine-free foams. And there's going to be a legacy quantity of the AFFF that will need to be properly disposed. The EPA put together a strategic roadmap on PFAS, and we're going to talk more about this throughout this webinar. Mainly establishing the universe upstream and downstream of sources, including sludge, which is kind of a passive receiver, but sludge disposal is a concern. Developing a sampling plan, and EPA has worked on that, and they've got that plan going. We've got the methods in place to sample, and we're going to talk more about sampling here in this webinar. And then implementing the solutions to prevent PFAS from getting into the wastewater. We'll have local limits and best management practices. And again, we'll talk more about that in this webinar. So some of the industrial sources of PFAS, these are ones that are listed in the EPA strategic roadmap. Organic, chemical, plastic, synthetic fiber manufacturing, metal finishing, electroplating, electronic and electric component manufacturing. Landfills are listed as a source. Pulp paper, paperboard manufacturing, leather tanning and finishing, plastics molding and forming, textile mills, paint formulating, and airports are all listed as sources in the EPA strategic roadmap. And because EPA has authority for the MPDES permits in some of the northeastern states, here's some sample language as in Massachusetts as people are renewing their MPDES permitting. EPA is requiring them to annually sample these types of industrial discharges, and these are similar to the list that I just showed you. However, this list also includes commercial car washes, centralized waste treaters, known or suspected contaminated sites, and I thought commercial laundries was on here, but it's not on this list, but there are some lists that include commercial laundries as well. So there's a lot of different kinds of sources here. As you can see, EPA is starting to mandate annual sampling here. Previously or later, we'll talk about frequency of sampling, and that we don't know for sure what that requirement will be. So to summarize on those sources, there were different industrial facilities Some commercial, like the laundries or the car washes. Domestic and residential sources, that is recognized as a source, but of course it's a large collective source, difficult to isolate. And then of course fire training and fire response sites. And what's interesting to think about on this is you can see that all of these sources would be discharging into solid waste, sanitary sewer, or stormwater. And so the PFAS, that's how the PFAS gets into those places where it is collected in these passive receivers. So EPA calls out landfills as a source, but the reason landfills are a source is because they're a passive receiver from these other sources that are the actual generators of the PFAS. But be that as it may, landfills, wastewater treatment plants, and municipal storm sewer systems are places where the PFAS can be collected and treated. So here's a PFAS cycle. This diagram has probably been seen before, but there's different, the real sources are the industries, the airports, and humans, consumers. Those sources discharge directly to the streams or to the wastewater treatment plant or to the solid waste landfill. And then the biosolids can be sources of PFAS or can be passive receivers that then as they get spread, that spreads the PFAS. So all of this is connected. We did a survey of small wastewater treatment plants in EPA regions 8, 9, and 10. And we had a couple of larger wastewater treatment plants participate also, but you can see that the majority of our respondents were less than 10 million gallons per day. When we asked people how many treatment plants their agency has, the majority were just one treatment plant. And then we asked them, in what ways is PFAS a concern for your wastewater treatment plant? And many of them are concerned about meeting existing or future effluent discharge limits, as almost equally as concerned about the biosolids land application or disposal limits. And then potential water reuse restrictions is a major concern. The majority of people are not yet testing for PFAS, although 40% are, so that's quite a bit. The ones who are testing for PFAS are testing at both the POTW influent and the effluent. And then some are testing for the industry and residential. And in the category of other, most of those answers were that they're testing their biosolids, and a few people are testing groundwater. The primary sources of PFAS for the people who are testing have found that residential is a primary source, but also a large number are not sure what their primary source is. Here are some of the industries that we asked about in this survey, because these are industries that are known to be sources of PFAS: chrome plating and metal finishing, airport and aerospace manufacturing, fire departments or fire suppression systems, and then landfills were ones that are known and known sources of PFAS. The majority of people that responded to our survey have no treatment technology in place for their wastewater treatment plant. And also, the majority have no pretreatment program or best management practices in place to address PFAS. Some of the pollution prevention actions that were reported included spill control and education, letting industries know that they're sampling for PFAS so that the industry is aware. And then people are working on source control, especially at the airports and the fire departments. So the majority of people have not done any outreach. You can see in blue, some people have done residential. In red, some have done commercial or industrial, and the yellow is they've done both residential and commercial. So we're getting some movement in that direction. There is a big concern about biosolids. ECOS, the Environmental Council on the States, collected information from state environmental agencies on their policies, testing, research, and communication challenges related to PFAS and biosolids. So this is a report you may want to look at. I've put the link for that report in there. You can also just do an internet search for ECOS, PFAS, and biosolids. Class A biosolids with no measurable quantities of pathogens have strict EPA guidelines for land application. Class B biosolids, which have detectable levels of pathogen, have restrictions on harvesting and animal grazing for numerous days or months. And both levels of these biosolids may also contain PFAS. Regulation and management measures have not been developed to mitigate the PFAS, but designated based on other impacts, such as introducing nutrients and minimizing contact with pathogens. For many states, allowable uses for land application of biosolids are dependent on the class of biosolids, but this is a moving target. Maine has banned land application of biosolids. There are a few states with proposed legislation, and many are considering regulatory action. So you'll want to keep up on what's happening in your state with the regulations on the biosolid use and disposal. And now I think it's time for Ari to come on board and talk about PFAS sampling. So Ari?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Jean. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ari DeHoop. I'm one of the outreach trainers for PPRC. I also am the pre-treatment program administrator for the city of Klamath Falls, where I live here in Southern Oregon. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the sampling. PFAS sampling, when you really want to begin with a quality assurance project plan or a QAP. Basically, in your QAP, it'll answer these 4 questions: the why, the what, the where, and the how. Your QAP basically begins with a little bit of the background of your facility, some background of why you're sampling for whatever it is you're sampling. In this case, it's PFAS, how you're going to go about sampling, where you're going to sample it for, how you're going to go about collecting those samples, preserving those samples, and getting them shipped off to the lab, and also specifies the credentials of your laboratory as well. Next slide. So the PFAS water cycle, you've seen this slide before. Where you're going to sample plays a large part in how you're going to go about sampling for PFAS. You might be sampling an industry that's suspected to contribute PFAS to the waste stream, which would be a point source. You may want to sample various locations within your wastewater treatment plant or your biosolids. Every site should be individually considered as an attempt to follow your sampling protocol or your QAP. Every sampling approach for the most part should be site specific in how you're going to go about collecting and shipping off your sample. Next slide. Your sampling equipment is split into 2 different categories. Category 1 is any item that will directly come into contact with your wastewater, including your various wastewater samples, your tubing, sample bottles, etc. These items should be known to be PFAS free prior to use. And I always try to get as much sampling equipment when it comes to the bottles water, lab grade water, or the deionized water in this case, as much as possible from the lab. It does cost a little bit more, but at least then you know for sure what you're getting from your lab is PFAS free. And whenever I have something that comes back in the form of skewed data, I always look at myself first and see, okay, what did I do wrong, or did I do everything right? So I always try to get as much as I possibly can from my laboratory. Your category 2 equipment is anything that does not come directly in contact with the wastewater, such as your GPS receivers, notebooks, clipboards, your clothing, your personal care products that you might be using, food that you might be consuming outside of the sampling area. And although these items may not directly come into wastewater samples, the surface of some of these materials may contain PFAS, and cross-contamination may still occur. So every effort needs to be made to ensure these items are PFAS free. Be aware the surfaces of this field equipment or containers which they are kept in may also contain PFAS. So, extra care should be taken to prevent cross contaminations. And if there's ever any doubt, change your gloves. If there's ever any question, always rule on the side of error. Next slide. Your pumps and your tubing, your sample equipment, you want to make sure you use only your sample bottles, tubings, beakers, spoons that are known to be PFAS free. They can be made of stainless steel, high density polypropylene, polyvinyl, polyvinyl chloride or PVC or silicone. It's again, strongly suggested that your contract lab that you're using for PFAS analysis provide you with these components to be verified that they're PFAS free, or at least constructed of PFAS free materials. And again, don't forget your lab grade water. I do use a lot of water, and our lab is a long ways away, so I do use distilled water. And if there's any question in that data, then when I get that data back, then I'm gonna have to start running more field blanks, more equipment blanks, maybe even to the point to where my rinse water should be analyzed for PFAS too. And if you do need to do a composite sample, ask your lab if they'll supply you with a certified clean PFAS-free sampling train that would consist of your sample suction tubing, peristaltic tubing, which would also have to be sent back as an equipment blank so the lab can run that. It adds more cost, but it's well worth the ruling out that any error that may happen out in the field. Next slide. So grab samples are a must, or at least they are the preferred method for collecting PFAS. You can see here, I have a swing arm. This is a NASCO swing arm sampler that I acquired. It had metal components on the end where the swing arm attached to the pole, and I took all that out and I put in HDPE or plastic parts that are approved for PFAS sampling. I decontaminate the swing arm sampler prior to sampling. I bag it up, and so it's protected from the elements just prior to sampling. On the right, you can see it. There's a little pincher grabber mechanism that you can actually use to grab your bottles and do a direct dip and get your PFAS samples as well. Next slide, please. So pre and post sampling equipment, again, your deionized water is the preferable water for use, a nylon scrub brush, your nitrile gloves, cotton towels for wiping anything down. And I use a 2% solution of Citronox, but the approved cleaning is Alkanox and Liquinox as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so your sticky notes, your Gore-Tex raincoats, foods, most of your personal care products, you just leave those at home. Don't take a chance with stuff like that unless they are known to be PFAS free. There are some copper tone products and some skincare products out there that are known to be PFAS free. They do say to use a fine point or a medium point Sharpie pin. The bold point Sharpie pins are still, the verdict is still out as to whether or not they're PFAS free. Eye substitutes are not known to be PFAS free yet, and of course latex gloves are not. So next slide. So what can you use? The Right in the Rain all-weather notebooks are a good option when you're taking field notes. Again, your medium or fine point Sharpie pins, your bottles that are supplied from your laboratory, your stainless steel sample, you'll see this in a video in a little bit, nitrile gloves off deep woods is known to be PFAS free, as well as in the upper right hand corner there, those banana boat skincare products that you see for skin protection. Next slide. So sample storage and preservation and shipment. Only open your bottles during your sample collection, protecting your samples from sunlight and from the outside elements. Refrigerate, get your samples on ice at least within 15 minutes. Include your temperature blank and ship your samples out overnight. And with that, Gene will start the video.
Gene, I don't think we're hearing any sound. I'm getting a couple messages from folks.
Okay, how do I make the sound work, Ken? We downloaded that, so it should have worked. Do you know?
Sorry, I muted myself again. You got it up all the way. I'm not sure if there's something in GoToWebinar that you need to do at the back end. There we go.
Can you hear it now?
Yeah, it's very faint.
This video shows the equipment and methods recommended in general for PFAS sampling for wastewater.
That's better.
It's important to not contaminate any of the equipment with personal care products or items that may contain PFAS. Follow your contract lab's instructions.
We're getting ready to sample PFAS for both biosolids and wastewater.
Shoot. Well, shoot.
The sound was good, Gene.
Treatment plant effluent. Prior to
Yeah, I'm
sampling,
hearing it.
evaluate
Oh my gosh.
best equipment needed to gather a representative sample. For today's sampling, I'm going to be using a ASCO sling arm sampler that I've modified. I've taken all the metal components off and put HDPE components on. A swing arm sampler like this, I can actually take and zip tie the sample bottle directly to the swing arm sampler and get a direct grab into the sample bottle, which is the preferred method. If I was unable to do that, then I have a stainless steel swing arm sampler, but it's a shorter fixed handle. You can transfer the sample from this into your sample bottle, but there's always a risk if you don't have proper decontamination, a risk for cross-contamination. Also, under deeper wet wells, I have a stainless steel dipper bucket that I can lower down into a wet well on a cotton rope and collect a sample in a wet well. Ideally, you want to try to get your wastewater sample in the mid part of the stream of flow to ensure you get a representative sample. You can also use a composite sampler if needed, but then you want to ensure that your sample train, which is your suction tubing, your peristaltic tubing, and such, is as clean as possible. I also have a bucket, stainless steel bucket with a scoop that I use for my biosolids composite sample.
prior to going out sampling, I clean everything with a 2% solution of Citronox and scrub it with a brush. I triple rinse with distilled water. DI water is the preferable water, but distilled water is all I got, and I use a lot of water when I'm doing this. One of the things I do look for and make sure is that the water that I'm using is in an HDPE storage vessel, which you can see below that triangle. It's a little hard to see, but that does say HDPE below it. I have my sample bottles that were prepared at the lab. I normally do not open these coolers until the day of sampling, and then I fill out the chain of custody forms and the bottle labels using a Sharpie fine point or ultra fine point pen. I also make sure I have plenty of Ziploc bags in case I need to double bag the sample bottles or even the ice. So we're going to get things cleaned up, and we'll see out in the field when we start sampling. So we got our chain of custody filled out. Our sample bottles have been filled out, ready for collection. And this is the field flame, which I haven't taken out of the package yet. I will transfer this out in the field into the sample bottle when I'm collecting my samples. This is all according to my contract lab's directions. They also send with the directions a set of gloves, which I will start with, since that's the materials that came from the lab. My dipper has been decontaminated and sealed up. All my other sampling equipment and my biosolids have been decontaminated. Got my gloves and my water. Ready to go sample. Okay, so I got my sample bottle affixed to my swing arm sampler. This is the outfall where I'm going to be sampling. It's a little foamy this morning from the mixing of bisulfite. Got the grab and then cap it right away. I'll do the same for the other three bottles. The field blank will just get poured into the other field blank bottle and packaged with the other samples. Biosolids monitoring. What I did was I did a grab composite. Here's my sample bottles. I haven't opened them until I'm ready to fill them. But I go around my biosolids pile and I do kind of a grid all the way around the perimeter of the pile, digging down below the surface about a foot or so and getting core sample grab from each area and composite that and then mix it and put it in my sample bottles. So now the samples are collected, chain of custody has been filled out, they're double bagged, and it's time to put them on ice. And you're ready to ship them.
To access technical resources, more FOG videos, or to submit questions about FOG and FOG abatement, go to westernstatesalliance.org or the QR code at the end of this video.
Okay, Ken, I think it's over to you now.
Okay, so hi everybody, my name's Ken Grimm. I'm the Industry Outreach Manager for PPRC, as well as one of the trainers. And we want to talk a little bit about preventing PFAS from entering the wastewater treatment plant in the first place. And it's going to involve, these three things, identifying the sources, and, if it's in industrial slash commercial, probably providing education, which includes BMPs. If it's residential, then it probably is going to involve providing education next. So when we look at when we talk about pollution prevention, we're a pollution prevention organization. And so we, it comes second nature to us, but it doesn't, there are some definitions, and it's something that not everybody is intimately acquainted with. So on the right-hand side here, you can see what the general waste management hierarchy is. The least preferable is disposal, and then treatment, recycling, material reuse, and then source reduction. The P2 Act of 1990 defined source reduction as any practice that reduces the amount of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant entering any waste stream or otherwise released into the environment. And this would be prior to recycling, treatment, or disposal, or any practice that reduces the hazards to public health and the environment associated with the release of such substances, pollutants, or contaminants. So you can see source reduction includes list on the left-hand side there. And reformulation is going to be one of the things, substitution as well. All of these things are going to be important when you develop your best management practices. Next slide. So this is a look at some of the implementation strategies, which you may be using some of these already. You do have the legal authority to address. In fact, you have the requirement to address PFAS. And so, setting up your legal authority, deciding what resources you're going to dedicate your time and your funding to. Are you going to spend most of it in training, implementing the BMPs, sampling, et cetera? You're going to want to do an industrial user inventory, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. You're also going to want to use your industrial user permits as a way to address PFAS, both a monitoring and control of. And also, you're going to probably want to, as you recall in Gene's slides earlier, a lot of folks noted that their largest PFAS problem was residential. So those sources, in fact, studies show that nearly every type of influent stream going into POTWs, which includes residential, contains some level of PFAS. So industrial pretreatment PFAS limits will have a significant impact, but they're not going to eliminate all of the PFAS from POTW discharges. Next, Gene. So what is it that pretreatment programs can do now? And the start is to begin with the industrial user survey. You want to expand the survey to include industrial users with the potential to discharge PFAS. There's several lists. We saw one of them earlier, but there's you can look at those and ancillary operations of facilities such as firefighting drills, vehicle washing, industrial pretreatment, et cetera. And one of the things we want to be very cognizant of is that facilities that have used PFAS-containing chemicals in the past may still be sources of PFAS. When you work on developing your best management practices, you're going to want to include things such as ideally product elimination or substitution. That may involve a level of technical knowledge that wastewater treatment plant staff doesn't have. But there may be other groups that do and can assist in finding substitutions for what they're using that are currently PFAS-containing products in the industrial process. Addressing accidental discharge and minimizing that by optimizing the operations or developing good housekeeping practices. And then equipment decontamination or replacement in areas such as metal finishing facilities where PFAS products have historically been used to prevent the discharge of legacy PFAS. There are facilities that have done complete substitutions and no longer use PFAS, but they have their discharges exceeded the the limits because they were using old equipment that hadn't been completely scrubbed and decontaminated. So, you know, the permit application of the industrial users is the time to screen them for potential PFAS emissions. And you want to be aware that many of the industrial users may not even be aware that there's PFAS in the materials that they use. It may or may not be listed on safety data sheets, and most commonly is not. And so you want to encourage them to contact their vendors so that they can get a better understanding of whether or not these things exist, a better understanding of utilities, effluent characteristics, treatment processes, and current residuals or biosolids management practices in the context of what's, you know, a rapidly evolving local and federal regulation process will help assist you in the risk management decision-making process. So go ahead and change that. Okay, so when you're developing a best management practice plan, you're going to want to identify all of the potential permittees, both industrial users and significant industrial users, determine if PFAS has been used at the facility, or is it being used at the facility now, I should say, and if not, has it been used at the facility in the past? And you know, you're going to want to consider both industrial uses as well as cleaning, pest management, emergency response applications that have been done at the site. So if the answer is uncertain, permit writers can consider a permit requirement that a site investigation or report be submitted that documents any uses or inventory of PFAS containing chemicals on site. And if they're in the facility's discharge, you can put something in the language that says, for example, within 6 months of the effective date of the permit, the facility shall provide an evaluation of whether the facility uses or has historically used any products containing PFAS, or the use of those products or legacy contamination reasonably can be reduced or eliminated, and a plan to implement those steps. And that's an excellent example of language to include in that to help make sure that what's coming into your facility is minimizing PFAS as much as possible. Also on the next slide, your product substitution and replacement is going to be your best bet. That's pollution, real pollution prevention, real source reduction, is find out if alternatives to PFAS exist, and if they're not available, then the permittee should document the basis for requiring PFAS, and whether or not they've investigated alternatives and why they've determined that they're not available if others have found them successful. You're also going to want good operating and housekeeping practices, you know, chemical inventory, maintaining an accurate chemical inventory, keeping safe chemical storage, making sure that they're following compliance requirements such as secondary containment, or placement away from floor drains that lead to wastewater treatment plant discharge or storm drains. You know, replacing contaminated equipment if necessary, containing or reusing contaminated equipment in between uses rather than rinse and disposal, containing contaminated rinse water of equipment, employee hand washing or protective gear. These are all things, having an emergency response plan, educating your employees. These are all things that are going to be part of a comprehensive best management plan. There is a document on the next slide. It's a fact sheet from the EPA. And it contains information about PFAS, industries that use a lot of PFAS, and best management strategies to avoid releases. They can be accessed at the link at the bottom left here. You've seen a couple of links in the presentation. and we will be posting this in the near future. And so you don't have to worry about trying to write these all down. They'll be available to you. Next. So finally, there are some separation technologies. These have all been proven to be pretty successful. These are separation technologies. So what they're doing is pulling out the PFAS. You can see on the left side the type of technology, and on the right a description of that technology and what it does. It still leaves PFAS as a chemical, but it separates it from the medium that it's being transported through, and these are all viable in commercialization, including commercial wastewater, or excuse me, municipal wastewater systems. And then lastly, there are some destruction technologies out there. This is an incomplete list. These are 3 of the ones that seem to be the most successful. There are others, including one that the military uses, but it's very expensive, and it's found to only be useful in a certain number of operations. The National Center for Biotechnology Information at the National Institute of Health is where you can go to find a complete list of PFAS destruction technologies. Is very comprehensive, including, their advantages, their shortcomings, the research information, and that sort of thing. So if there's if best management practices aren't going to be the complete solution, there are some things here, but there isn't much on that hierarchy between disposal and best management practices that are successful for PFAS. I'm gonna pass this over to David, and David, take it away.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, my name's David James. I'm one of the PPRC trainers and have been doing environmental consulting and working for EPA and state regulatory agencies for, oh gosh, over 40 years. But quickly, just to close out, working with others, that's so important. There is a lot of information that many states and trade associations have been putting together on PFAS and PFOS and emerging contaminants of concern. There's some drinking water standards that have been published. There's some water quality standards that have been published, and in various states are actually making some of those standards more stringent. We're seeing more public notification requirements coming out, like for fish advisories and stuff, where people have found that fish and other wildlife might contain high levels of these compounds, and of course the regulatory authorities evolving. Next slide, please. So what can we do to help? As I mentioned, there's a number of trade associations that cover the nation, as well as state-specific trade associations. In each of these organizations and associations that you see listed have delved into the world of PFAS and PFOS. And so there's a lot of outreach materials that are available through these and other organizations that aren't listed on this slide. And basically, like what we try to do with this webinar is to help build awareness and give you some places where you can kind of start to help educate yourselves and then start educating other people within your community. Because even with a lot of the regulations, so much of this of these chemicals are coming from stuff that's consumed by people such as you and I, and so they're going to be in the waste stream for a while. So anything that we can do to help reduce that stuff at the source, kind of like what Ken was talking about, will be good. And getting involved, get involved with the trade associations and things to learn more, and eliminate the availability. I mean, where there's some products that can be substituted, that's a good thing. Reducing demand, that's always a good thing. That's in the spirit of pollution prevention. Next slide, please. And next slide. So I mentioned that EPA has now published some drinking water standards. And again, different states are taking a look at this as well. So if you're not, it's always a good idea to work with your state regulatory agency, find out what the standard is in your state, just in case it is more stringent than the federal standard. And so here's like a list of some of the compounds and the maximum contaminant level that's enforceable. So drinking water plants are going to have to put in technologies to remove these chemicals down to those final MCL values. Next slide. Another thing that many states have now actually started enforcing, and I use the word enforcing, the water quality standards. I kind of use that in parentheses. But there are a number of standards that, like if you have a wastewater treatment plant that's discharging into a receiving stream that's covered under one or more of these standards, then that effluent is going to be expected to meet these standards. So this is kind of an evolving thing, and so you know, stay tuned for coming attractions, as one might say. But the implication for any size wastewater treatment plant, particularly the large ones, but any size treatment plant, if they're discharging into a water quality segment that's covered under a water quality standard, then the permit, the discharge permit, can be amended to include either sampling and monitoring for these pollutants and then reporting the values that you get, or in some cases, that's already happening in some states, where there's actually limits, it's a requirement, and so their sampling and testing has to be at or below the limits that are in the discharge permit. Next slide. So I know that was a lot of information that was that's been coming at you, and I know we're just a little bit over on time. So Jean, if we want to do some questions, do we want to do that, or?
Well, we had one question come in, and folks, if you have any questions, please use that question panel over there in your GoToWebinar box. The one question that we were thinking of addressing is how are people identifying sources of PFAS, residential, commercial, or industrial? And that was asked in response to the results of the survey that we gave. And we didn't ask the different jurisdictions exactly how they were identifying those, but I don't know, David or Ari, if you want to make any comment about that.
Yeah, I can jump in there, Gene. Yeah, so you know, basically, with our if you have a pretreatment program, you obviously should have a pretty solid background and understanding of what you have in your service area as far as industries goes or businesses, and they can all be evaluated on an individual basis. Right now, I have a military installation that I've been sampling for PFAS. I'm sampling the treatment plant. I'm also going to move upstream into some more residential areas that have some commercial influencers, an educational institution, and a timber affiliated industry. And so just kind of moving upstream, knowing what you have in your system, knowing what geographical area they lie within, do some field sampling, get a geographical idea of where your PFAS may be coming from, and then moving upstream as you go along. So that's kind of our approach with it right now.
Thanks, Ari. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions in the question box. We will be posting this video and the slides at the westernstatesalliance.org website. I'll also send an email to everyone who's on the list today. I'll send you a link to those resources. Oh, here's a couple other. When do you see potential federal enforcement of PFAS regulation coming, or do you think it will remain up to the state's discretion? Who's got that crystal ball?
Gene, this is David. Yeah, my crystal ball says it's going to be a mixed bag. A lot of states are waiting on EPA to come up with something definitive. You know, like for example, the water quality standards that's been they've been waiting on that for a while. And there's some states that have now actually they require rather their POTWs to actually develop local limits around the PFAS and PFAS. So that means effluent testing, looking at removal efficiencies. And of course, one of the challenges that many utilities are finding is that the actual amount through biological action and the magic of chemistry, the amount of PFAS, PFOS in the effluent actually goes up. And so that's causing quite a kind of a controversy in different parts of the country. So, I think the main thing from my perspective is again to get involved with these associations so that you can kind of monitor the status of what's going on in your state, because there are some states that are aggressively beginning to regulate the PFAS and PFOS.
Thanks, David.
And if I might add too, so our agency is actually taking a proactive approach in trying to get ahead of the game. Is at least if we know what we have coming into us. For instance, the military installation that we have, they're a large employer in our area. They're a good neighbor in our area, and they didn't ask for the problem, so it's trying to work from a source control perspective and a cooperative perspective as to how can we get our hands around this before any regulatory action deems necessary. And we've also definitely stepped up our education and outreach to the general public in raising their level of awareness where PFAS may be contained or where it may be coming from too. And I need to pitch our pre-treatment conference that's coming up. We will have some EPA representation there that will be giving some more specifics as far as updates go at our pre-treatment conference in Vancouver. All the information is on the PPRC, your Western States Alliance website, and it's going to be October 21 through the 23rd in Vancouver, Washington. So if you want to know more from the horse's mouth, so to speak, we will have a couple of folks that are highly represented with the EPA, and they will be there to give us an update and answer any questions we might also have in advance.
All right, thanks, Ari. And I don't see any more questions. And since we're about 10 minutes over, I think we should go ahead and close it out. Thanks everybody for being here today. We'll follow up with an email with some additional resources for you. And we hope you all have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.